Good afternoon. I will now call the Finance and Responsible Governance Committee meeting to order. This meeting is being held in person and electronically in accordance with the Municipal Act. Consented items. For the consent items, I'll read out the title associated with the recommended motions printed on the agenda to see if members of committee would like to deal with them on consent or hold them for discussions. Items that are not held will be deemed approved on consent with no further discussion. They will then move forward to the next general committee meeting for consideration. The first one is item 8.1, which is the Sea Cadets use of General John Hayter South Shore Community Centre, and that's approved on consent. 8.2, amendment to procedural bylaw 2019-100, and that's approved on consent. And 8.3, committee updates, which involves some movement of some individuals in regards to some of our committee makeup, and that's approved on consent. And 8.4, which is licensing of water sports, and that's approved on consent. So all of the items on the agenda have been approved on consent. And to double back to the presentations by staff officers, agents of the corporation, we have one presentation on the agenda this afternoon, and that is from Mr. Zachary Spicer, Public Affairs Consultant and Municipal Electoral Systems Expert regarding the City of Barrie ward boundary. I would now like to call Mr. Spicer to the podium to deliver his presentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Excellent. I have some slides up there. So my name is Zach Spicer, and I am here today to walk you through the process for the ward boundary review. I've had a chance to meet with most of you, but I'm a sub-consultant with Watson's Consulting and an associate professor in the School of Public Policy and Administration at York University in Toronto. I'm here alone tonight, but throughout the ward boundary review process, you'll be seeing some of my colleagues, namely Jack Amendolia, who's a managing partner with Watson's. So tonight we want to get into what the ward boundary review process looks like, what we hope to accomplish with it, and what some of the timelines are. And we'll focus on some of the unique geography and features of Barrie's electoral system. So, namely, we are curious about what the ward boundary system is doing well, where some of the pressures lie, and where certain parts of it could be optimized. We're especially interested in whether the current wards deliver fair representation conducive to good governance. The big question is whether change is needed, and I should note at this point too that the status quo remains an option available to Council. Council can opt to make changes based upon recommendations that the consultant team makes, or it can make no changes and keep the current wards in place for the 2026 municipal election. We want to know, however, whether change is necessary, and if so, what it looks like. That involves both council and the public. In the coming days, we'll be launching a ward boundary review website in conjunction with the clerk's office and the city's communications team. On the slide, you'll see a couple of examples about what that might look like. On the website, the public will see background on Barrie's electoral system, what the ward boundary review process looks like. There'll be a survey available to them to provide feedback to us. And we'll also have a series of educational videos, including a whiteboard video, which is a plain language and concise overview of what the wards do, their importance not just on election day, but in the city's governance process, and what the public can expect throughout the review process, including how they can provide feedback to us. If council were to decide to make changes to the wards, they are within their legislative rights to do so. The province of Ontario certainly places boundaries on certain aspects of local elections, spending limits, the process to elect the mayor, for instance, but the composition of council and the composition of the wards themselves are within the purview of council. The composition of council, namely the number of wards within the system, is not is not within the scope of this particular project. We will be looking at the composition of the wards themselves. In terms of timeline, if council were to make changes, a bylaw enabling them would have to be passed by December 31st, 2025. Our intention is to aim for June to complete the project. We do so for a number of reasons. The clerk's office needs to prepare for the next election, and we want to give them as much time as possible to do so. Prospective candidates seeking election or re-election require clarity on the ward boundaries and the population within them. And we also want to leave time for a potential appeal. If council were to pass a bylaw, an elector within the city could appeal the bylaw to the Ontario Land Tribunal. The OLT would very likely hear that appeal in a very quick fashion, given that the 2026 election is approaching, but we want to make sure that we have ample time to allow for that if it does occur. A ward boundary review comes with a series of guiding principles, all of which stem from a 1991 court decision commonly referred to as the Carter case. These principles help us operationalize the term effective representation. These principles are balancing present and future population within the wards. We essentially want to make sure that there is a roughly equal number of residents within each of the wards. This ensures that they have a roughly equal say on council and that there's a roughly equal workload for each of the members of council. We're going to do our best to forecast out towards the 2034 municipal election, meaning that we're going to be accounting for a number of different developments within the city. We want to make sure that the ward boundaries grow with the city and that you can reach reasonable population parity towards the 2034 municipal election. Next, the next principle is respecting established neighborhoods and communities, commonly referred to as communities of interest. This means that you wouldn't typically run a ward boundary line through a established neighborhood. This is to make sure that that each of the wards comfortably contains a number of neighborhoods and identifiable communities of interest. Finally, the principles call for respecting geographical features and defining natural and infrastructure boundaries. This means that that the ward boundary lines are clear and the markers are recognizable, meaning that the boundaries conform to roadways, railways, things that are naturally identifiable for residents within the city. It has been some time since the last ward boundary review. I should note that this is a healthy process. It's sort of like a checkup at the doctor's office. At the time of the 2013 review, the city had a population of approximately 136,000 residents for an average of 13,700 for each of the wards. As we know, the city has grown considerably since then. Between the 2011 and 2021 census period, the city has experienced about 9% growth. As we know, of course, this growth has not been evenly distributed. Certain wards are growing faster than others and are expected to grow considerably as we move towards the 2034 election cycle. The average for each of the wards right now is 15,295 using 2021 census data. There is some disparity between the wards with a difference of approximately 6,000 residents between the lowest populated and highest populated ward. That's not a great disparity, but we do expect that to grow as we move towards the 2034 election cycle. The city itself elects 10 councillors and a mayor. Composition is not part of this review, but just to put Barrie into comparative perspective, with comparably sized municipalities, Barrie is right in line, slightly above the average in terms of council size. In terms of timelines, tonight we're at the introductory workshop. I've had a chance to interview most of the members of council, and this has been very pleasant conversations and very informative conversations, and I really appreciate you providing me with some of your time. Next, we will be moving towards the public engagement phase. We're going to be launching the ward boundary review website shortly, which will include a survey for members of the public to provide us with feedback on the process. We are also going to be having a series of in-person engagement meetings, which we're working with the clerk's office to establish. We will take all of that information back, including the feedback from members of council, and create alternative ward boundary designs. These will be included in an interim report, which we will present to council and place on the ward boundary review website. We'll then take these options back to the public, who will be able to provide us with feedback on the survey from the ward boundary review website, and we'll also have another series of in-person engagement meetings to gather feedback from the public. From there, we will refine the options and make final recommendations to council in the spring and summer of 2025. Again, our timeline is looking towards June. With that, I know we only had 10 minutes to present, and I do hope I am within that time. And I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have. Thank you very much for having me here today. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you for your presentation. And first, I'll take members of committee for questions. Mayor Nuttall.
Yeah, thank you. Believe it or not, I was the only member of council who was on the last council that did this. Yeah, so if you don't like your ward, I guess that was part of the reason. I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you. I had a really good open dialogue conversation with you today. It sounds like through the presentation, which was, I think, very reflective of the conversation we had, that all of the things that I think that we would all want taken into consideration are being taken into consideration. You know, the identity that exists in certain parts of the city, the hard lines on where, you know, wards could go, and what we feel separates and creates a new identity, a new place. And so all of those things are great. But I do want to, I guess, publicly state what I said to you in private, which is, I think that the most important piece of this is representation of population, rep by pop. And it is a core principle for our democracy. It is something that we take very, very, very seriously. And, you know, for folks who may be watching this at some point, you know, when one ward is, let's say, 13,000 people, I think was the lowest, and another is 19,000 people today. I think those were the numbers. You end up with a 6,000 person variance, or almost 50%. And so what happens is 3 votes in one ward is equal to 2 votes in another ward, and you water down the value of the vote. And that's why rep by pop matters, I think, so much. So you have a tough job to do. And if we go rep by pop, there's necessarily changes to be made, not just for 2026, but when you look out to 2034, I mean, the thing that I always talk about where the city is lopsided and it's gone south is real. And the population growth there is real. It's not the same real in the same way in the north end, except in Ward 2 from what I could see. So this is a bit of a scary venture, right? Because it could mean real big changes, or it could mean really small changes, right? But if we're going to go and follow what our entire democracy is built on, I think that there's the potential for some substantive changes for the way our ward systems are set up. So thank you for the work you're going to do, and I really do appreciate the conversation you had today.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Councillor Kungle.
Okay, I'll try and keep it short. I've got a ton of questions, but I'm going to try and cluster them into different themes, and I do appreciate the time we had together, Mr. Spicer. How about two? Two multi-bulleted questions. Some just maybe a point of clarification more on process, and maybe to start through you, Chair Harvey, to Ms. Cook from the clerk's office. I don't want to make assumptions about the terms and why. I'm seeing the last time we did this was 3 terms ago. And it looks like it's something that if we make a change, you're assuming it's going to hold true for 3 terms from now. Is that legislated around how often we do this, or is this just kind of a norm around City of Barrie as a corporation around how we've kind of reviewed it? Or is there anything that is a parameter about when this is kind of structured for review and how often we change? Just don't want there to be a perception that it can or cannot be touched again, should we be seeing that we need to adjust something in time with development.
Just ahead of you answering, I think that might be more so directed at the clerk when it comes to the direction and why this got initiated. So I'll give Madam Clerk the first opportunity.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Chair Harvey, to Councillor Kungle. Generally, ward boundary reviews are done when we realize there is an imbalance in population amongst the wards and in representation. Given the growth over the city over the last 10 years, we are recognizing that some of the wards by 2026 and definitely by 2030 will be really vast representation. Some will have 25,000, some will have 13,000. So we thought this was the time to do the review. Generally, as Dr. Spicer had noted, municipalities do them pretty much every 2 elections. They'll go through 2 election cycles, and then they'll conduct another ward boundary review. That's kind of a common practice amongst municipalities, especially those that are growing municipalities. Those that are more stagnant and haven't grown in a long time, the frequency of ward boundary reviews would be less frequent, obviously.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. My next question through you, Chair Harvey, to Mr. Spicer more formally. So these are kind of quick, high level, maybe more takeaways. So hearing you talking a bit about engagement of council and the public, really would love to understand how you see staff in scope of this, and a couple things come to mind. I'm assuming, without asking staff directly, that they might have an opinion if they've lived through the historical kind of realignment in 2013, but even current state. So one of the biggest complaints I get, I'm not sure about others, but the change to ward boundaries between 1, 2, and 3 at least, don't align to postal codes. So often there's that confusion around mailouts, especially during campaigns or elections, but in general, a perception of a waste of resources or confusion about which ward you're in, because unless you're going to go door to door, you either opt into a postal code route or you have to opt out. So sometimes I'm wondering if separately, I'm assuming that type of lens around how information communication is distributed is coming into scope with considerations when you talk a bit about the actual composition around roadways and boundaries and those. But separately, I would see that staff might have some experiences around what is working well with the boundaries in dealing with wards, either through the clerk's office as staff or through communications or in general dealing with council, and the way in which, because we're not an at-large system, how information is funneled, and we've invested in service Barrie and other pieces. So that's more just around, I would assume staff could have opinions about what is working well or not, at least from a communications information flow and being frontline to the public. Is that being part of your engagement strategy as a stakeholder?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. In the ward boundary review process, we often speak with staff as well. The Watson's team is working directly with the clerk's office and also with the planning department. In other reviews, we have interviewed senior staff in the same way that we have interviewed councillors. We typically will reach out to staff after we have a chance to speak with council. The council interviews are pretty much all complete, with the exception of one councillor, which I will follow up with shortly. After that process, we usually determine, in conjunction with the clerk's office, which staff would be best suited to speak with.
Thank you, Mr. Spicer. Through you, Chair Harvey, separate kind of lens of questions. When you talked a little bit about fair representation, and what I heard from you was you're really looking at residential and those that are voting as kind of around who has a voice, I guess. I would say our stakeholders are much larger than that. So a takeaway, and we can have a further conversation, is, how are we viewing businesses and those that I would say are also a key stakeholder with an award? They may not be voting, but they could have influence, but also, regardless of that, they are people we serve, they're entities that we serve and deserve representation. So would love to know, are they engaged in this? Do they have an opinion? Or are you really just looking at engagement scope to residents? And in general, my bigger questions, not to answer tonight, but to take away, are that's so fluid. So my assumption is that when you're talking a bit about fair representation and future planning out to 2034, that maybe you're also looking at approved developments to date or forecasted ones and units and density infill expected. But within that, knowing that we do have pockets of residents, I'm not sure what degree of demographics you can successfully get outside of census, but around those that actually have voting rights, those are at age to vote or will be at age to vote over time. And so how does within a family structure change when we talk about number of individuals within a household who vote, and how are you fleshing out those considerations? So we're just not looking at a person as a person, but are you getting down to a finer level of understanding within those nuances of communities, those that tend to have individuals that may be students, may not be voting within the Barrie area. So those uniquenesses, how are you fleshing out that a person is not just a person at a residential level when you're using them as your count for fairness?
An excellent question, through you, Mr. Chair. Just on the first point that you raised around engaging folks who may not be considered residents. Oftentimes, BIAs, neighborhood associations, different community groups will often take part in the public engagement process. They're certainly not only welcome, but also encouraged to come out to any of the engagement sessions and also complete the survey. We feel that they often present a fairly unique perspective that is valuable and insightful for us to hear. So they would be included in that process. In terms of getting a more finer grain on who the residents are, what we're looking to in terms of population projections, in terms of the final count for each of those wards, those are residents, not just electors. So it's more or less a head count, not just those who will be turning up on election day to actually vote. Councillors, of course, are representing everyone, children as well. We are going to run some of the data around children and to see what family sizes, things along those lines. We understand that can change the role of a councillor given the composition of your ward, more seniors, more children, things along those lines. The final population projections are based on total residents, but the different characteristics within the wards is certainly something that we will be taking into account. The final recommendations, just to harken back to those principles, a ward boundary review isn't necessarily a strict numbers game. We in a perfect world, all of those principles would be balanced, but in some cases we have to privilege some over another. So that's why potentially communities of interest could be prioritized to ensure that we're keeping some of those strong community connections together. And to do that, we have to understand the composition of neighborhoods, family sizes, things along those lines.
That's great. Thank you. No further questions.
Great, thank you. Any members of non-committee? Councillor Harris and then Councillor Morales.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Harvey, and through you to Dr. Spicer. Thank you for the time spent yesterday. I really appreciated being able to go through this in detail with you and So there's a lot to learn. I appreciate giving my perspective and feedback. I'm just curious on the focus on Barrie slide, and it's great to see how we compare to other municipalities. And I understand that the mayor is included in the 11, which changes the number. But I was curious, in the focus on Barrie, why we wouldn't have had here's the current average per ward, given that representation, the focus, the overriding principles affect representation. And as Mayor Nuttall noted, like right now it's the issue with the ward. And I agree, 13,000 population ward and 19,000 population ward, knowing that probably is going to get to be larger is an interesting place to start. So just curious if you have that current breakdown of the number of population per ward and how that breaks down as average population per member.
We certainly have that information using 2021 census figures. The clerk's office included that in the RFP. I don't have the numbers per ward with me today. I do apologize for that. But as we prepare the ward boundary review website, there'll be a series of discussion papers there that go through the process of a ward boundary review, but also do a bit of a deeper dive into each of the wards, and we'll certainly be presenting the public and council with a detailed breakdown of the population within each of the wards.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Maybe just a comment. I know at election time it matters. Your election budget depended on how many people in your ward, but other times it doesn't seem to matter. So I'm glad to see this actually being brought forward because there is a discrepancy now, and we know that it's likely to get larger. So I appreciate the effort to take a look at this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Chair Harvey. Thank you, Dr. Spicer. We had a great session today, at least on my end. I think you probably got 200 words in the hour, so, but it worked on my end. He took a lot of info, Mayor Nuttall. He definitely earned his time with me. So just to the point, thank you. I like the session we had, but I also like the change of ideas, perspectives here. For the point to Canada Post, through you, Chair, it's not really a question, it's just a good comment that Councillor Congo made. So Canada Post actually has a government relations officer, a person that I met at FCM. They actually helped me out very specifically with a mailbox that had some unique safety issues. They don't move mailboxes unless pertaining circumstances. Anyways, we have the contact, we have a cell phone number, and if we get to that stage, Mayor Nuttall, I think this should come from you or designate. I don't, in my personal opinion, and just kind of giving the feedback, based on the criteria that you put in your PowerPoints of natural heritage features, but demographic and things that make a neighborhood is a neighborhood, I don't think that the guiding of this, it's your job, and councils will stamp it, but from my perspective, it shouldn't follow necessarily arbitrary mail routes, because those are for efficiency. They don't take into account necessary demographics and all these really good criteria that you're putting there. However, the point is good that those, to the best of their ability, should follow, the mailing routes should follow that. So maybe a letter that comes eventually going, these are our new boundaries. If you can do something to make the postal codes align with the boundaries, not necessarily the boundaries align with the postal codes, I think would be helpful. And then that's a comment. And then the question, here's another kind of comment question. The populations, and we all have some data here about our best guess at current populations and our best guess at expected projected populations based on different data, including densities that we expect to come in, infill, et cetera. Does this take into account both legal and non-legal second units and third units? And I don't know who I'm asking that, either to Dr. Spicer or staff members.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Through Councillor Harvey, Chair Harvey, to Councillor Morales, we will try and take into account any second suites or accessory suites that we're aware of, because some of them we may not be aware of, but we can probably, I can ask Ms. Banfield, there's probably a way we can average it out, and Mr. Spicer, or Dr. Spicer is working with her team on those population figures. So it is like we would treat them as we would like a high-rise building, like, so people in a high-rise building would be accounted for as part of that population. So if there's an average per person per accessory unit, we may use that as a basis. So, but we would work closely with Ms. Banfield's team and and Dr. Spicer to figure that out.
Let me have a follow-up to that and make it more specific, make my question more targeted. Um, So that's for the legal units. There's a gray market. There's always a gray market in every city. I've heard in the past, I'm not citing anything specific. I don't know if it's Barrie or some GTA stuff, but it's sometimes assumed that there's a 10%, 15, I think it's under 20% of units that are ground-oriented units. So we're not talking stack towns, we're not talking buildings or walk-ups. Ground-oriented units that have illegal units of some sorts, whether it's the in-law suite that technically isn't, sorry, that wouldn't count. But if it's a market unit that's in the basement that shares a door, or it's not, or it's legal, but just not registered, are the numbers accounting for that gray area, or are the numbers only going for what we can factually cover? Because that does affect numbers and percentages.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the Watson's planning staff has a formula to account for some of this. I'm not a professional planner myself, so I can't speak to that directly. Watson's does a lot of the education planning throughout the county and is working with a number of different lower tiers within Simcoe County on similar reviews. So they have a formula and they have accounted for some of that, especially around some of the rapid growth. What I could do is I could ask the planning staff at Watson's to be in touch with the clerk's office, and perhaps that information could be distributed to you later in the week.
That's amazing. Thank you. And the reason I bring that up, just to close this for everybody, is once in a while I'll drop off a newsletter or Christmas card myself. Sometimes I mail it out. Sometimes I do it. I'm getting to the habit now of looking at the side door, and I'm in cookie cutter suburbia, and sometimes just a secondary door to the garage. But now more often with renos, and we're going off stereotypes here. These are not houses these are owner-occupied houses where they don't need to have a second suite, but they're choosing to, and they're being rebuilt, the proper steps instead of just the grass. The other sign that it is a new unit and not often registered is they cover so the snow doesn't, like where the door is, so it's covered. So if it's happening in Ward 9, where there's a lot more what I call the invisible residents, invisible voters, for the purposes of accounting them in this exercise, if it's happening in Ward 9, it's definitely happening in Ward 1. We all know that. If anything, there's rooming houses, there's student houses. So if it's happening in kind of southeast cookie cutter suburbia, and I want to make sure those numbers are captured in the data when we're doing the boundary adjustments. We only do this every once a decade and a half. So I want to make sure that at least that number is captured in some way, and I figured this was the right forum to bring that up. So thank you for your presentation, Dr. Spicer.
Thank you. And I guess to that point, I guess it's very, very difficult to be 100% bang on with your numbers. Obviously, you can only do your best with the data that's available. And I guess the last census in 2021 or whenever it was would obviously be a good baseline for you. But it seems like it's definitely difficult to 100% say these are the exact numbers right down to the point. Would I be fair in saying that?
You are correct, Mr. Chair. The planning staff certainly used 2021 census figures as a base, but also use planning data. So they'll be working with the planning department to get up-to-date projections, and they have a number of different formulas that they would apply to account for some of that growth, including trends throughout the region. I can't speak to the exact formula, given I'm not a professional planner, unfortunately, but that will be explained in detail in both the interim and the final reports, so that the public is fully aware about how we are making those types of projections as we move towards 2034. Unfortunately, we can't project with 100% accuracy, but our commitment is that we will do our absolute best to let council understand where some of that growth is going well into the future.
Great, thank you. Is there any other members of non-committee? Councillor Corser.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm not sure if this is going to the clerk's office or to Dr. Spicer or to Ms. James Reed. How does the public outreach roll out in these? Is this in-house or is this the consulting firm that actually does the public outreach? And how is it done? Is it mail outs? Is it like door knocking? How exactly do you capture the information from the public for engagement?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that question. That's an excellent question. The Watson's teams works with both the clerk's office and the communications team to come to the best approach for that. In some cases, it is Watson's doing. In some cases, the city has a standard protocol. I believe there's a meeting early next week to determine that. Our goal, of course, is to make sure that the engagement sessions and the ward boundary review website are distributed as widely as possible to ensure that we get as many people as possible participating throughout both rounds of public engagement.
And just to answer one of your questions when we were talking on the phone, Riverview would actually, it's from a farm.
Okay.
Yes, it was named after a farm. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Great, thank you. Any other members of non-committee? No? Great, well, thank you very much for your presentation. I know when I had my session with you, it was just as informative from my end as I hope it was from your end with our discussions in regards to my ward. So thank you for your presentation and all the work that you're going to be doing to bring back to us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. With that being said, since all of our items on the agenda were dealt with on consent, we are now at adjournment. So this concludes the Finance and Responsible Governance Committee. This meeting is adjourned and council will, by the looks of it, be on time around 7 o'clock.